How you doing, guys? Today we're going to go back to our roots and we are going to work on a RJ transmission. Up here on the jack stands, we have a standard RJ transmission, a 5003 or 5003 if you want to call it that. Fully dressed, we still got all the accessories still on it, but let's take a look at the numbers real quick. On the case it says E2-9, which reveals to me that this is a May. That's what the E stands for, right? January, February, March, April, May, the 5th month. The 2nd of the month, and -9, 1959. So May 2nd, 1959, I believe the center section was casted. There are a series of numbers here casted just behind the shifter, which is 3501. You can't really see the 1, but the 1 is underneath all that crud. To be brutally honest, I don't know exactly what that means. If you do, put it in the comments below for me. Unfortunately, overall the transmission's in real good shape, but unfortunately it has been torn into at one time in the future, and I can tell that by this. Number one, the drain plug is completely butchered. Somebody took a vice grip to it a number of times, so I'm going to have to take a vice grip to it. So we'll eventually get a new plug for that, clean it up, and then the second giveaway is right here. This roll pin hole. There is no roll pin that holds the hub, the 3-bolt hub for the RJ rim onto the transmission. So, and I'll show you why in a second, but somebody's been in this transmission before. There's been work done to this transmission. The bushings here at the end seem to be good and tight. These axles don't slop around up or down. So with this, which I'll explain in a second, seeing this hole here, and the bushings, or I should say the axles being fairly tight in the axle tubes, somebody has been in this transmission at one time and probably rebuilt it, because it being a 59, usually those axle bushings are all blown out. It does have a set of newer seals on it, but that would be correct for 1959. The older seals would have just barely kind of fit inside the axle shafts, or the axle tubes, I should say, sorry. But this seal riding up and over the tube itself is a later model tube. That would have been correct for a 59, but I'm probably pretty safe to say that somebody's been in this transmission at one time, probably rebuilt it. So let's take a look. First off, we got the paperwork out, because you guys know I like to show paperwork. 1959, 5859, transmission is a 5003. 1960, they changed it to the 5010. If we go through this menagerie of paperwork, okay, and this is how to rebuild one of these transmissions. I've had it for years, but let's take a look at the exploded view, and real quick. All right, exploded view. Where are we? Oh, sorry. This is where we want to go. If you notice here in the axle shaft, I'll get as close as I can. This is where the 3-bolt hub goes. This is the end that goes into the differential. Boom, right there. You see there's a roll pin that goes down inside the axle. Essentially what happens is this gear, the axle gear, okay, this little end slides into the differential, okay? So this is inside the differential. That's what the pinion gears will ride on. There's a Woodruff key, which keeps that gear from spinning on the shaft. That's what actually causes the shaft to move. And that roll pin then gets pounded in to hold the gear, this face, the back, this front face, against the back, or actually that little spot right there, in the differential. So that gear is Woodruff keyed to the shaft, so that spins the shaft. The back side of the gear pushed up against the differential housing, and the roll pin goes in to keep the gear from kind of floating on the shaft, if you follow me. But when it comes to The hub side, it's just slip fit on, and then there's just a 3/8 square bolt that holds it onto the woodruff key or onto the shaft. So there's no roll pin. A very classic move, okay, to fix these transmissions. As these bearings, or this is the bushing that actually gets pressed into the axle tube. They kind of ride, obviously, right in the same spot. Well, the bushing starts to wear out, and it also starts to wear out the axle shaft, the steel axle shaft. And that little bit of play, where the axle will kind of bounce up and down, will absolutely destroy the seal every single time. Oh, actually, here it is again in the blowout. There's the bushing, presses in, and then there's the seal. And you can see this has a small seal. It doesn't have that big seal like we have on the transmission itself. That's an early style seal. So what happens is with that play, the shaft within the bushing, okay, it pushes up against the top side. The seal blows it out. So if you just say, oh, my transmission's my RJ's leaking out the axle shaft, and you just replace the seal thinking that's going to fix it, pretty much it will not. Within a few, operations, it's going to start leaking again. It's going to start leaking out the bottom of the seal because the top of the bushing is worn out. Now, a very classic move to fix this situation, because the axle itself has some wear where the bushing rides, okay, is to flip it around. Just go ahead, drill a 1/4-inch hole through this end of the axle shaft. Take that end, stick it in the differential. This end where the roll pin hole was already, swap it over to this side, flip the axle around. So now the new bushing rides on a new section of axle, because the worn out section kind of goes into the differential and is immaterial to the whole process of it operating. So that alone pretty much tells me somebody at some time has been in this transmission and torn it apart, and they have done that classic move. Now, is there anything wrong with that? Not really. It's just, indicative of somebody being inside the transmission and making a repair, because the bushings were probably worn out, the axle was probably worn out. It'll be interesting to see once we tear this whole transmission apart what the wear looks like, and we'll assess what we're going to be doing. And basically, I'm thinking this just needs to be totally cleaned and a reseal, because as long as the bushings measure out fine, we're good. All right. Man, a lot of useless RJ transmission knowledge. I'm going to go ahead, undo the set screw on the input pulley and get that out of the way. Got to be very careful. Those are brittle. They do break, and then it's a pain in the back end to fix them. Over here, there is buried under all that is a snap ring. We'll get the snap ring off, undo the 1/4-20 bolts, get that off. There is a roll pin that holds this clutch in right, whoa, it's down there, sorry. Right there, we'll get that. Oh, yeah, look at that. There's some wear and tear in there. We'll have to take a look at that. Maybe we might re-drill that for a bigger roll pin, but we'll leave that for a later decision. But right now, let's get the oil out. Let's break the cases apart and see what we got inside. I better get my vice grips. Just a little bit more evidence that somebody's been in this transmission. This is a newer seal, and it actually looks like it's in great shape, to be honest with you. But I did tell the customer we were going to take it apart, clean it, make sure everything's all set. We'll get a new set of seals, but input shaft looks pretty good. This end of the axle shaft, even though it's been swapped around, it's in pretty good shape, just needs to be cleaned. The seal's in good shape, but we'll replace that. Obviously, we're going to have to crack the cases and reseal them. The one thing I wanted to show you is to get these old beat up woodruff keys out of the axles. What I do, and this tends to be fairly successful, I'm going to replace the woodruff keys anyways. You never want to just reuse these pieces of junk. So I'll just take a pair of vice grips. I clip it onto the edge of the woodruff key, something in this fashion. Make sure you got a good bite on that woodruff key, and then with my little hammer, I just will tap the top of my vice grip, and usually that works it out. Now, if it's real stubborn, I will go ahead and grab my MAP gas torch and give it just a touch of heat, and that typically will loosen up the woodruff key, and it'll come out. So as you can tell, those two came out just the way I explained it. So I'm going to go ahead and see if we can tackle this one. Voila! With the transmission situated on the jack stands in this fashion, you could even do it up on a workbench if you wanted to, but this is kind of like the worst part of the entire project, typically for me at least. That's because you can never get all the gear lube out of one of these transmissions. So I'm going to go ahead and take my 1/2 inch ratchet here, or 3/8 ratchet with a 1/2 inch fitting. Pull all the bolts off, knock the side cover off, and then we can really take a look at what we got going on inside. So I took all the bolts out. I took a rubber or dead blow hammer, just hit the edge of this real lightly. That loosens up all the case cover. A couple things on this. Number one, the bolts were way too tight. They do not need to be as tight as they were. Torque wise, I don't know what they are, but when we put this transmission back together, I'll show you how I kind of torque it. The other thing too is kind of interesting. If you see right here, somebody really went to town when they were putting this seal in. You can see it's all smashed in and crushed. You can even see how it's ballooning out the seal itself. There's another mark right over here. It's actually almost separated from the rubber. So definitely need to reseal this transmission. I'm going to pull the cover off right now, and let's see what little treasures are inside. With the side cover off, there's more evidence that somebody has rebuilt this transmission at one time. Namely, the bushing in the differential itself is new. The inside of it's fairly clean. I can't really show you on the camera, but there's no real scores. The other thing too is this bushing is a little proud. It's sticking out just a couple thousandths above the differential housing, which is not completely optimal, but not a big deal. That could be because it's bottomed out on the gear, and or they just didn't push them. It didn't, press it in, deep enough. But we'll take care of that, or we'll look at that later. As you can tell, there is a bunch of oil still left in this thing, which basically you can never get out. It makes a complete mess, like I said. That is third gear. It's all covered in oil, but when we get it out, we'll have to take a look at third gear and make sure that it's not all chewed up. But in general, everything looks good. It's just, it's just poopy. The other thing that tells me that this has been rebuilt or messed with is if we look at the side cover, according to the drawing, there's two bushings. Okay, there is bushing number 37 on the schematic. That is the bushing that goes in the end of the actual shaft, and there's bushing number 41, which actually is that bushing that I was just talking to you about inside the differential. There is no bushing at the inside edge or inside end of the axle. So in other words, there is no bushing here at this end of the axle tube. But somebody did put a bushing in this side of the axle, as we can see here. It's actually a pretty good idea. I would approve of that. So that's part of the reason why I think the axle doesn't rock around in the inside the transmission itself, because it's being it's being supported in a number of places, one additional place compared to stock. So that's pretty good. These bearings, all these bearings seem to be really good. I mean, obviously they got oil. This is the input shaft. I'll have to get this out
It's coming out with my hands here. Let's see if I can get it out. Yeah, there we go. Overall, that's in good shape. Doesn't appear that any of the teeth are really destroyed. It's interesting gear lube. It's almost looks like blood. Hopefully I'm not bleeding, but we'll put that there. So this needs to be all cleaned up. Got to get the bushing, the seal out. I'm going to go ahead and start pulling some of the gears out of this case. We'll get the empty case, get the oil out of it, and then we'll clean everything up and see if anything needs to be actually repaired. With all the gears out, holy my God. I don't think I've ever seen sludge as bad. Oh my, look at this. I have never seen a RJ transmission this sludge. It's literally, you know what? Hang on. We got to do this. Here, I'll just clean this up. Just a hair. Okay, let me just scrape that off. Now, I'm not going to stop the rolling of the film, but what we're going to do is we are going to get my tape measure, and we're going to measure the sludge in here. It's worth getting coated in crap. I think, I'm hoping I can show you, that is literally a 1/4 of an inch of sludge in the bottom of this transmission. Holy cow. Literally, I've never seen a transmission with that much sludge in the bottom of it. Luckily, everything looks like it's okay though. Very, look at the brake shaft, very minimal wear. They may have replaced that at one time, I don't know. All the gears here look in real good shape. There's a little chipping on this, chipping on this cluster gear, but that's to be expected. Everything looks really good. So I'm actually going to take this thing outside and scrape it out in the backyard somewhere. Or I'll put it in my pan actually and get rid of it. But that is just, look at that. All right, well, like I said, what kind of treasure are you going to find in there? Put everything run through my parts washer. Everything looks really good. Needs new seals. The bearings all look fine. Minimal rust on the gears, which is typical for these transmissions. The side covers, they all look good. I'm just going to hit them with a little bit of a brake cleaner just to finish cleaning them up. The only thing that's an issue is the input shaft. There is a really good groove right where the seal goes. Plus the Torrington bearing is pretty much junk. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap it out with another input shaft I have. This one looks crusty and dirty, but this one's actually in really good shape. Bearing's great, just needs a shoe shine sand on the shaft itself. It'll go all together. I've already made sure that it'll fit the slide gear shaft, which is this one right here. So with that, I am going to just call this one a video. Next video, we'll put it back together. There really isn't a lot of work to do on this. It just needs to be cleaned up and put back together. All right, guys. Ooh, what do we have over here? Are you saying to yourself, a Briggs & Stratton engine?